The calm before the storm, hook and suspense. The human fleet moved slowly through the cold, empty void of space. The stars around them were distant and silent, casting only a soft glow on the massive ships that made up the fleet. Despite the calm beauty of the scene, there was a heavy feeling in the air. The crew of the flagship, Vanguard, could sense something was wrong. It was as though the universe itself was holding its breath. They were not alone. Captain James Hunter stood at the bridge, looking out at the vast darkness beyond the windows. His eyes were narrowed, his posture straight. The deep lines on his face showed the weight of the many battles he had led. The ship's hum was the only sound breaking the eerie silence as the crew prepared for what was to come. Everyone could feel it, that strange pull in the air. Something was coming. But what? "Captain," said Lieutenant Alice Turner, her voice calm but with a hint of concern. "We're picking up strange readings on our scanners. There's something massive out there, but it's moving too fast. It doesn't fit with any of the known enemy fleets." Hunter's eyes flicked toward the monitor, studying the data. It didn't make sense. They had received reports of enemy movements in the region, but nothing like this. The readings were unlike anything they had encountered before. They were too powerful, too large. "We can't be sure," Captain Hunter said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Stay alert, everyone. I want full scans of that area. Get me a clear image. Prepare for anything." The crew worked in silence, their hands moving across buttons and screens with practiced ease. But despite their training, the tension in the room was palpable. It wasn't the normal anticipation before a battle. It was something else, something they couldn't quite place. Hunter stood still, his mind racing. The enemy, if that's what this was about to face one of the most experienced fleets in the galaxy. The humans had fought countless battles, had been through wars, defeats, and triumphs. But even so, the unknown made them uneasy. He had seen war tear apart entire civilizations. He had seen the unthinkable happen in the blink of an eye, and for a moment he wondered if this would be that moment. "Captain," said Turner, her voice breaking through his thoughts, "we've got a visual. You need to see this." On the main screen, the image of what they had been tracking began to form. The shape was enormous, a series of colossal ships that looked like they were built for destruction. But there was something strange about it. They were unlike anything Hunter had ever seen. Their ships had no sharp edges, no weapons visible on the outside. But the energy readings were off the charts, and that could only mean one thing. The enemy was preparing to strike. Hunter's jaw clenched. Enemy fleet confirmed. But why are they so far out of their territory? He muttered to himself. The enemy wasn't known for taking such risks. Could this be a trap? Or worse, a show of overwhelming force? "We're outnumbered," Lieutenant Turner said, breaking the silence. "They got the advantage in both size and firepower." Hunter turned to face her, his mind already working through the possibilities. "We have the element of surprise on our side. They won't expect us to engage first." But even as he said the words, he wasn't sure if he believed them. The enemy ships were too massive, too powerful. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on him. A small mistake could mean the destruction of their fleet. "Captain," a voice from the tactical console interrupted his thoughts. "We've detected their fleet's weapons systems powering up. They're preparing for an attack." Hunter's eyes narrowed, and a chill ran down his spine. This was no longer a mere encounter. It was a countdown to war. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The first move would decide everything. "Initiate combat readiness," he ordered, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. "We'll move in as soon as possible. I want every ship prepared, but hold fire until I give the signal." The crew immediately sprang into action, securing their stations and making sure every system was at peak performance. The air in the bridge became thick with concentration. They all knew what was at stake. Every person aboard the Vanguard had trained for this moment, but now that it was here, the reality of it felt heavier than ever. Hunter gazed out into the blackness again. He could see the massive enemy ships slowly moving closer. He had no doubt they were ready for battle. But he also knew one thing. They were underestimating humanity's resilience. The humans had fought wars they had no business winning. They had faced destruction and come out victorious. But this enemy was different. This wasn't some warlord or hostile faction they could outsmart. This was a force that might destroy them all. And yet, Captain Hunter felt something deep inside him. The unshakable belief that humanity's greatest strength wasn't just in their weapons, but in their will to fight. As the seconds ticked by, the crew waited for their captain's command. The calm before the storm was nearly over. And then the enemy made their first move. A new threat revealed. The tension in the bridge was thick as the crew prepared for the unknown enemy's first move. Captain Hunter's hands were steady on the control panel, his eyes scanning the fleet's readiness. The enemy ships were massive, larger than any enemy fleet they had previously encountered. And their weapons, as indicated by the power readings, were nothing short of terrifying. "Captain," said Lieutenant Turner, her voice tight with concern, "we've got more readings coming in. They've launched something. Small pods, but they're moving fast." Hunter's eyes narrowed. "Pods? Are they preparing to attack with smaller ships?" he asked, turning to his tactical officer. "No, sir. These readings, they don't match any known ship designs," the officer replied. "It's as if they're deploying advanced weapons, something designed to target our defenses directly." Hunter's heart raced. The last thing they needed was a surprise weapon that could neutralize their shields or break through their lines. He had fought countless battles, but this felt different. The enemy wasn't just planning on a fight. They were out for total annihilation. And now they were launching their attack. "Prepare our fleet. Activate shield systems across all ships. No one goes in without full protection," Hunter barked. "And keep me updated on those pods. If we can't understand what they are, we need to destroy them first." His voice cut through the crew's tension, and for a moment, they focused solely on their duties, knowing the battle was inevitable. The human fleet, though smaller, was packed with experienced soldiers and cutting-edge tech. They might be outnumbered, but they weren't outmatched. "We've got a visual on one of the pods, Captain," said one of the officers, a young ensign named Thomas. "It's coming toward us. Fast." The screen blinked to life, showing a small, sleek pod racing toward the vanguard. It was barely a fraction of the size of the enemy's massive warships, but its speed and design made it an immediate threat. It looked like nothing the humans had ever encountered before. The pod was a sleek, metallic cylinder, glowing with strange energy lines running across its surface. Hunter's stomach churned. "What is that? Could it be a missile?" The ensign's voice trembled as he processed the data. "Sir, it's not a missile. It looks more like a weaponized probe, and it's heading straight for our engines." "Target the pod," Hunter ordered sharply. "Fire everything we've got." A barrage of laser fire and missiles shot out from the vanguard, cutting through space in a flash. But the pod, somehow, dodged them with precision, moving in unpredictable angles. It was clear now that the enemy had anticipated every move. They were ready for every counterattack. Hunter clenched his fists. What kind of enemy are we dealing with here? Before he could get an answer, the enemy made its first full strike. The massive enemy ships began to fire their main guns, sending powerful energy blasts toward the human fleet. The blasts were unlike anything the humans had ever faced, cutting through the void of space like a knife through butter. "Shields at 60%, Captain," shouted Lieutenant Turner. "We can't hold much longer at this rate." Hunter's mind raced as he tried to come up with a solution. The fleet was in danger, but they couldn't fall back now, not after coming this far. "Give me full power to the forward shields," he ordered. "We need to hold them off long enough to take out that pod. Ensign, get a lock on the pod. It's priority 1. "Yes, sir," Ensign Thomas responded. Hunter's eyes flicked to the view screen. The enemy ships were moving into position, their weapons aimed directly at the fleet. The time for preparation was over. The humans had to strike before the enemy did. "We've got a lock," Thomas shouted. "Firing now." The Vanguard unleashed a precise shot, but just as it seemed to be heading straight for the pod, a brilliant flash erupted from the pod itself. The energy was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Bright, almost blinding, as it sent shockwaves through the fleet's shields. The pod exploded into thousands of shimmering particles, but as it did, the entire fleet felt the shockwave. Their shields flickered violently, and some of the smaller ships were knocked out of formation. They had only managed to destroy one of the pods, but it had already taken a heavy toll. "Captain, more pods incoming," Turner called out urgently. Hunter gritted his teeth. This was bad. They weren't prepared for this level of assault. But the humans had one thing that the enemy didn't. They had something to fight for. They had the will to survive. "Brace for impact," Hunter ordered. "Deploy all drones. Keep moving. Don't give them a chance to regroup." The battle had begun, and now the humans would need every bit of their strength and courage to win. Preparing for the impossible, the enemy's relentless assault continued, and the bridge of the Vanguard hummed with frantic activity. Captain Hunter's mind raced through all possible strategies, but nothing they had tried was enough to counter the enemy's devastating technology. The strange pods were tearing through their defenses, and the massive warships fired in waves, each shot more destructive than the last. "Captain, our shields are down to 40%, Lieutenant Turner reported, her voice strained. "We can't keep this up much longer. The smaller ships are holding on, but we're taking hits from all sides." Hunter gritted his teeth. They couldn't let the enemy wear them down. If they didn't act now, the battle would be lost. But the question remained, how could they fight an enemy who seemed to have thought of every possible defense and counterattack? "We need to turn the tide," Captain Hunter said, his mind working furiously. He knew their fleet couldn't take much more punishment. If they stayed on the defensive, they would be wiped out. They had to fight back, but it had to be calculated. It had to be precise. "Ensign," he called to Thomas, "do we still have any undamaged ships with full weapons capability?" Thomas's eyes flicked across his display, his hands moving quickly over the control panel. "Yes, sir. The Sentinel is reporting full weapons readiness. They're ready to engage at your command." Hunter nodded, his mind already forming a plan. The Sentinel was one of their best ships, fast, agile, and heavily armed. If they could get it in close enough, they could create a gap in the enemy's lines. "Good. Send the Sentinel on a flanking maneuver," Hunter ordered. "They'll draw their fire. Once they've got the enemy's attention, we hit them with everything we've got. I want every available drone deployed immediately." Hunter turned to Turner. "Lieutenant, I need full power to forward shields. We need to absorb as much damage as possible so we can launch our offensive." "Understood, sir," Turner replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. She knew exactly what was at stake. They had to do this or risk losing everything. The Sentinel began its maneuver, darting between the enemy ships with speed and precision, drawing fire away from the Vanguard and the rest of the fleet. The enemy's massive warships fired relentlessly, their beams lancing through space like bolts of lightning. But the Sentinel was fast, darting through the chaos with an almost uncanny agility. "Now," Captain Hunter shouted, "full fire, target the largest ship's weak point." The Vanguard and the other ships in the fleet opened fire, launching a barrage of missiles, laser blasts, and energy beams straight at the enemy flagship. The first salvo hit its target, but the enemy ship's shields flared, absorbing much of the damage. The humans' weapons were powerful, but they were still fighting an uphill battle. "Captain, they're adapting," shouted Ensign Thomas. "The enemy flagship is shifting its shield frequency. We can't break through." Hunter's eyes narrowed. They couldn't afford to waste time. He needed a new strategy, something bold, something unexpected. "All ships, Fall back to a new formation, he ordered. We're going to use the experimental weapon. We need to hit them with everything at once. Turner, get me full power to the energy reserves. Turner's face tightened. But sir, we're running low on energy. If we overextend, we'll lose power before we can finish the strike. Hunter looked her in the eyes. We don't have a choice. This is the only chance we have to end this. Make it happen, Lieutenant. As Turner worked furiously to reroute the power, Hunter's mind flashed back to the experimental weapon they had been developing. It was a high-risk, high-reward option, something they'd never tested in real combat. If it worked, it could level the playing field. If it didn't, they would be defenseless. Prepare the experimental weapon. Full charge in 60 seconds, Hunter ordered, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. The crew moved quickly, each person fully aware that their survival depended on the next few moments. Hunter's heart pounded in his chest as the countdown began. The Vanguard was low on fuel, low on power, and low on options. But this was humanity's last hope. 15 seconds, Turner reported, her fingers flying over the console as she adjusted the power levels. We'll have full power in 10. The crew held their breath as the weapon powered up. The energy inside the ship began to crackle, the air growing heavier with anticipation. Hunter knew this was their moment. The entire fleet was holding its breath, waiting for him to give the order. They had no backup, no second chances. The attack had to succeed, or they were done. Now, Hunter shouted. A massive surge of energy erupted from the Vanguard, and a beam of pure destruction shot out toward the enemy flagship. The beam cut through the darkness of space, focused, intense, and unstoppable. It struck the enemy flagship directly, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The enemy ship's shields flared one last time before they collapsed completely. The beam pierced deep into the heart of the enemy ship, and with a mighty explosion, the flagship was torn apart. The surrounding enemy ships faltered as the loss of their command ship sent ripples through their fleet. Direct hit, Captain, Turner exclaimed, her voice full of disbelief. The flagship's been destroyed. Hunter allowed himself a moment of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. The battle wasn't over yet. The enemy fleet still had powerful ships remaining, and they were not backing down. We've shaken them, Hunter said, his eyes hardening. But we need to finish this. All ships converge on the remaining enemy targets. No survivors. The battle was far from won, but the tide had turned. The humans had just given the enemy a taste of their power, and now they would show them what humanity could truly do when pushed to the edge. The battle begins. The explosion of the enemy flagship sent shockwaves through the battlefield, shaking the entire human fleet. The once dominant enemy ships, now leaderless, began to falter. Their coordinated attacks turned chaotic as they scrambled to regain control. Captain Hunter could feel the shift in the atmosphere, but he knew the victory wasn't secured yet. The enemy was dangerous, and desperation could make them more lethal. Status report, Lieutenant Turner. Hunter barked, his gaze locked on the view screen where the enemy ships, though weakened, still loomed ominously. The enemy is reeling from the loss of their flagship, Turner said, typing rapidly into her console. But they're regrouping. Their smaller vessels are adapting faster than we anticipated. They're closing in on our flank. Hunter's eyes narrowed as the remaining enemy ships began to form up, their weapons primed for a counterattack. The Vanguard had taken out the largest threat, but the enemy was not ready to give up. They had underestimated humanity before, and now they were making the same mistake again. Deploy the drone fighters, Hunter ordered. I want them on the enemy's flanks. Keep their focus away from the core ships. We need time to reorganize and finish them off. The small drone fighters shot from the hangars, zipping through space at blistering speeds. Their tiny forms swarmed like bees, darting between the larger enemy ships, firing relentless volleys of lasers and missiles. The drones kept the enemy busy, drawing their fire and drawing them into the middle of the battlefield, where the larger ships could close in for the kill. But the enemy wasn't making it easy. Their smaller, faster vessels turned on a dime, countering the drones with precision and speed. It was as if they had been programmed to anticipate every move. "We've got a problem," Captain Ensign Thomas said from his station. "The enemy has deployed their own drones. They're more advanced than ours. They're tearing through our defenses." "Stay focused," Hunter snapped. "We can't let them get the upper hand now. We've taken their flagship, and we're not losing this battle. Bring all remaining firepower to bear on their central cluster." The Vanguard and the other human ships locked their weapons onto the largest remaining group of enemy vessels. It was a calculated move. They would take out the enemy's remaining force and finish the job. Hunter's voice rang out across the comms. "This is it, everyone. Push them back. Show them what we're made of. Humanity fights for survival, not for conquest. But we will defend ourselves, and we will win." The entire fleet surged forward, closing the gap. The battle erupted in a storm of energy beams, missiles, and debris as the human ships rained fire on the remaining enemy targets. The human fleet was outnumbered, but they fought with a strength that the enemy could not predict. The energy blasts from the Vanguard tore into the enemy lines, ripping through hulls and disabling ships one by one. But the enemy, despite their losses, refused to retreat. The remaining warships shifted, pulling together in an attempt to form a final desperate counterattack. A massive energy beam fired from the largest of the remaining ships, aiming directly at the heart of the Vanguard. "Captain," shouted Lieutenant Turner, "it's coming right at us. We can't outrun it." Hunter's mind raced. There was no time to dodge. They had only one option. "Power everything into the forward shields." "Hold tight," Hunter ordered, clenching his fists on the console. The massive beam hit the Vanguard with a thunderous explosion. The ship's shields flickered violently, but they held, just barely. The impact shook the entire ship, and for a moment, it felt as though the Vanguard might break apart. The crew braced for impact, holding their breath as the seconds stretched on. "Shields are holding, Captain, but we've lost power to auxiliary systems," Turner reported, her voice full of strain. "We need to get those weapons online again." Hunter nodded, his heart pounding. They had survived this blow, but it wouldn't be long before the enemy tried again. They needed to finish this. "Regroup the fleet," he ordered. "We can't take another hit like that. Push forward. Use our remaining drones to cover our flanks. I want all fire directed at their lead ship." The remaining enemy fleet was visibly faltering, their ships damaged and their counterattacks growing weaker. The Vanguard and its allies pressed forward, focusing all their efforts on the remaining threat. The drones continued to harass the enemy, keeping them distracted, while the human ships moved in for the final assault. "All ships, concentrate fire on their lead ship," Hunter commanded. The fleet's weapons fired in unison, creating a deadly barrage that overwhelmed the remaining enemy ship. The energy blasts tore through its hull, and in a brilliant explosion, the last of the enemy's command ships was destroyed. Hunter allowed himself a moment of relief as the remaining enemy ships began to retreat. They had done it. Against all odds, the human fleet had won the battle. But the victory was bittersweet. The damage to the fleet was severe, and the cost had been high. As the enemy forces scattered, Hunter knew that they had earned this victory, but at a price. "We've won, but this is only the beginning," he said softly to himself, looking out at the shattered remains of the enemy fleet. "The galaxy will never forget what humanity is capable of." The turning point. The enemy fleet, now severely weakened, began to pull back. The remaining ships, though formidable, were retreating in disarray. The humans had struck a decisive blow, and the momentum of the battle was shifting in their favor. Yet Captain Hunter could sense that this was far from over. The enemy wasn't backing down. They were regrouping, preparing for a final push. "Captain," Lieutenant Turner reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. We've got more ships incoming. Smaller, but they're fast and heavily armed. They're trying to flank us. Hunter's eyes flicked to the screen, where enemy reinforcements were coming out of the darkness, far too fast for their weakened fleet to properly respond. These new ships were sleek, almost ghost-like, and carried advanced weaponry that made them seem like an entirely new threat. The enemy was down, but they weren't out. "This isn't over," Hunter muttered under his breath. He had been preparing for this possibility. An unexpected reinforcements. The real challenge, he knew, lay ahead. "Turner, reroute all energy to the forward shields again. We need to absorb their incoming fire while we regroup." The Vanguard shuddered as the incoming enemy ships opened fire, their beams striking the human shields with a violent intensity. The shields flared brightly but held, absorbing the full force of the onslaught. The human fleet, though exhausted and battered, held firm in the face of the enemy's sudden resurgence. Hunter didn't hesitate. This was their moment to strike. "Deploy the final wave of drones. I want them to cover the entire battlefield. Use our fighters as backup. Keep the enemy distracted long enough for us to finish them off." The human fleet wasn't just fighting with weapons anymore. They were fighting with every bit of strategy and resource they had left. Their last wave of drones swarmed across the battlefield, darting between the remaining enemy ships, launching attacks that kept the enemy forces off balance. The fast, agile drones provided much-needed cover for the larger human ships, allowing them to focus fire on the reinforcements. Hunter felt the adrenaline course through his veins. This was where battles were won, not by strength alone, but by tactical superiority, by knowing when to attack and when to retreat, and by understanding the enemy's weaknesses. "Ensign," Hunter called to Thomas, his voice sharp. "I need a clear lock on their lead ship. If we can take that down, we'll cripple their coordination." "Locking in now, Captain," Thomas responded, fingers flying over the control panel. "Firing now." A concentrated volley of fire from the Vanguard and its allied ships erupted, striking the lead enemy vessel with pinpoint accuracy. The ship's shields flickered and faltered, and before the enemy could react, a devastating missile strike tore through the hull, sending the lead ship into a spiral of destruction. The battlefield trembled as the ship exploded, sending debris flying in all directions. For a moment, it seemed as if time itself had frozen. The human fleet watched as the enemy forces scrambled in confusion, the loss of their lead ship leaving them without coordination or direction. "Direct hit. Lead ship destroyed," Turner shouted in triumph. But Captain Hunter remained focused. There was still work to be done. The remaining enemy ships were now in full retreat, but they had one last trick up their sleeve, a desperate final charge that would test the limits of human resolve. "All ships, focus fire on the remaining enemy vessels," Hunter commanded. "This ends now." The remaining enemy ships, though fast and armed, were no match for the concentrated firepower of the human fleet. The Vanguard and its allies moved as one, their weapons working in harmony to tear through the final remnants of the enemy fleet. The battle that had seemed so impossible only hours ago was now reaching its conclusion. Within minutes, the remaining enemy ships were destroyed or fleeing, their resolve shattered. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, stood victorious. Hunter stood at the front of the bridge, watching as the last enemy ships disappeared into the distance. The battle was over, but the cost was steep. The Vanguard had taken heavy damage, and many of their allies had fallen in the fight. The crew, though exhausted, had emerged victorious, but only just. Hunter knew this would be remembered as one of humanity's greatest victories, but at the same time, it was a reminder that peace could never be taken for granted. The cost of victory was high, and the galaxy would not forget the ferocity with which the humans had fought. "This is just the beginning," Hunter said quietly, turning to Lieutenant Turner. "We've proven ourselves today, but the war is far from over. We've shown them what humanity can do, and we'll show them again, if necessary." Turner nodded solemnly. "We'll be ready, Captain. The enemy may retreat, but we've made a statement today." The crew of the Vanguard shared a silent moment of understanding. They had survived, together, and their resilience had won the day. Victory in seconds. The battle had lasted for hours, each moment fraught with tension and uncertainty. But as the last remnants of the enemy fleet began to disintegrate before them, Captain Hunter allowed himself a brief moment of triumph. The once overwhelming force that had threatened the survival of humanity was now reduced to scattered debris and fleeing ships. The human fleet had weathered the storm and emerged victorious. "Captain, we've eliminated the last of the enemy ships," Lieutenant Turner reported, her voice relieved but exhausted. "We're scanning for survivors, but it seems like most of them are retreating into deep space." Hunter's breath slowly released as he stared out at the remains of the battlefield. The debris from the enemy ships floated in the cold expanse of space like a grim testament to the violence that had unfolded. The damage to the human fleet was significant, but it wasn't catastrophic. The Vanguard had survived, and that was all that mattered. "Get me a damage report," he said, turning away from the view screen. He could feel the weight of the battle in his bones. There were still repairs to be made, still lives lost, but they had fought through it. "How's the fleet holding up?" "Several ships are reporting critical damage," Turner replied, scanning the reports. "We've lost communication with the Sentinel. It's likely been destroyed in the final assault. But the majority of our forces are still functional. We've got casualties, but nothing we can't recover from." Hunter nodded solemnly. "Prepare a casualty report and get me a list of the ships that need immediate repair. I want us to be ready for the next phase. We're not out of the woods yet." His words carried a weight of truth. While the battle had been won, this was far from the end of their struggles. The enemy would surely return, and they needed to be ready for the next fight. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do when pushed to the edge, but that didn't guarantee peace. The war was far from over. "Captain," Ensign Thomas called out, his voice tentative, "we've picked up something strange, a signal, coming from the far side of the battlefield. It's faint, but it's not from any of our ships." Hunter turned toward him, curiosity sparking. "What kind of signal?" "We're not sure," Thomas replied, his fingers dancing across the console. "It's encrypted, very high-level encryption. Could be an emergency transmission or something more. Should we investigate?" The idea of a mysterious signal after such a violent battle was troubling. Was it a trap, a last-ditch effort by the enemy, or something else entirely? "Plot a course for the signal. Full power to engines, Ensign," Hunter ordered. "We'll investigate, but keep your guard up. If this is a trick, I want to be ready." As the Vanguard slowly turned toward the distant signal, the tension in the bridge remained high. The crew, though exhausted, were alert, knowing that even in victory, there was always the possibility of a new danger lurking in the shadows. Hunter kept his mind sharp, constantly evaluating the possibilities. The war wasn't over just because the enemy had retreated. They had to be prepared for anything. "Captain," Turner said, her eyes scanning the readouts, "the signal is coming from a remote area of space. It's strange. There are no known planets or stations in that region." "Could it be a trap?" Hunter asked, his voice low. "It's possible," Turner replied. "But it could also be something valuable. Intel, a weapon cache, or even an ally. We can't afford to ignore it." "Agreed," Hunter said, making a decisive motion with his hand. "Prepare a boarding team. We're going to investigate it up close. But keep weapons ready. We don't know what we're walking into." The Vanguard moved closer, and as they approached the signal source, Hunter's mind raced with the possibilities. What had they just found? The mystery of the signal could change everything. But no matter what lay ahead, the humans had shown their resilience. They had faced a superior enemy, had stood firm in the face of overwhelming odds, and had come out on top. But now, with the battle behind them, the real test was about to begin. The galaxy would never forget the humans' power, their fight, and their victory. The war was far from over, and their story was only just beginning. The aftermath and a new hope. The Vanguard slowly approached the source of the mysterious signal, the crew on high alert. The tension in the bridge was palpable as they neared the coordinates. Even though they had just emerged victorious from a battle that had tested their limits, Hunter knew that the real challenge was only just beginning. What they had discovered here could be a game changer, or it could be a trap, the final trick of a defeated enemy. "Captain, we've reached the coordinates," Ensign Thomas reported. "We're in range of the signal's source. There's something there, something large, but there's no sign of any other ships nearby. It's just floating in space." Hunter looked out the viewport at the vast emptiness of space. He could feel the weight of their situation. This could be a new discovery, something to shift the balance of the entire war. Or it could be nothing more than a cruel joke, a final test designed to lure them into a false sense of security. "Bring us in closer," he ordered. "Prepare the boarding team. I want full scans of that object." As the Vanguard edged closer to the signal's source, the crew's excitement mixed with caution. The object was slowly becoming visible, something enormous, almost like a derelict ship, but the readings didn't match anything the humans had ever seen. Its surface was coated in strange, iridescent materials, as if it had been constructed by an entirely different civilization. "Lieutenant Turner, what are we looking at here?" Hunter asked, his eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar structure. Turner, her face tense with concentration, scanned the object. "I'm not sure, Captain. This isn't anything we've ever encountered. It doesn't match any known designs from the enemy, or from our allies. It's old, ancient even, but the technology is advanced, almost beyond our understanding." Hunter turned to the comms officer. "Get me a direct link with the object. Let's see if we can decipher what it is. But do it carefully. We don't know what kind of response this thing is capable of." As the link was established, the object's mysterious signal grew stronger, almost as if it were alive. The readings fluctuated erratically, and a strange hum echoed throughout the ship. The crew members exchanged nervous glances, their hands hovering near weapons, just in case the unexpected occurred. Suddenly, the screen flickered, and an image appeared. It was a message, written in a language they didn't recognize, but the symbols were clearly important. A moment later, the message was translated into simple, universal terms. It was a warning. "The war is not over. Your survival depends on the path you choose. Seek the Alliance, or fall like those before you." The crew stared in stunned silence, trying to process the weight of what they had just discovered. The message was cryptic, but the implications were clear. There was more at play in this war than they had realized. The enemy they had just defeated wasn't the only threat to humanity. There were others, and some force was warning them of even greater dangers to come. "Captain," Turner said, her voice trembling, "this isn't just a message. It's a warning. We've been playing in a larger game than we understood. There are forces out there, watching us." Hunter stood still for a long moment, letting the message sink in. His mind raced. They had fought to survive, to protect their people, but now they realized the scope of the war they were truly involved in. The enemy they had just destroyed was only one player in a much larger conflict, a conflict that had far-reaching consequences. "We've won this battle," Hunter said slowly, his eyes hardening with resolve. "But this war is far from over. There's something bigger out there, something we don't fully understand yet, and we need to find out what it is." The message said it. "Our survival depends on the path we choose. We have to take the right path." The bridge was silent as the crew absorbed his words. They had just won a victory, but the future was uncertain. Humanity had proven its resilience, but the real test was ahead of them. They weren't just fighting for their survival anymore. They were fighting for their place in a galaxy filled with ancient forces, hidden alliances, and threats they couldn't yet comprehend. "Prepare to launch a full investigation," Hunter ordered, turning toward his officers. "We're going to find out everything we can about this alliance. We need answers, and we need them now. As the Vanguard set course for the unknown, the crew braced themselves for what was to come. The war had changed in an instant. What had seemed like a victory for humanity now felt like the first step into a much larger, more dangerous universe. Captain Hunter stood at the front of the bridge, his expression set. The battle had been won, but this was just the beginning. Humanity had proven itself, but the galaxy was a far more complicated place than they had ever imagined. The unknown awaited, and they would meet it head-on. For the first time in their history, humanity had not only fought to survive, they had fought to thrive.